Don't let him drive. Emily's voice shattered the silence, sharp and desperate, cutting through the noise of the party around them. James Anderson, the billionaire, turned, confused. What? Emily, what's wrong? He laughed, his voice dismissive, still not taking the girl seriously. Emily's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, her breath shallow as she stared at the car parked just ahead. You don't understand, she whispered, a tremor in her voice. I saw him. He's not who he says he is. James raised an eyebrow, still incredulous. Who? The guy outside? Come on, Emily, I've got this. Don't worry about it. But Emily could feel it in her bones, the warning, the panic rising like a tidal wave. Her eyes followed the figure standing at the edge of the driveway, watching them. The man who had been circling the party all evening, staying in the shadows, barely noticed by anyone. No one but Emily. Her instincts were screaming now, urging her to act before it was too late. Emily, it's just a misunderstanding. I don't. James began, but she cut him off. No, you don't get it. He's dangerous. The sound of tires screeching cut through the air as the man stepped forward, his silhouette dark against the evening lights. James took a step back, the uncertainty creeping into his expression. What are you talking about? He asked, suddenly uncertain. The car engine roared to life, and Emily's heart raced. She could see it all unfolding in slow motion, the moment she had feared for so long. She pulled out her phone, trembling as she brought up the video, the footage of the man's earlier conversation with another unknown figure. She had heard it. She had seen enough to know. He wasn't who he appeared to be. Watch this, she said, voice shaking. James took the phone from her hands, looking at the screen. The video was grainy, but there was no mistaking the man in it, his words clear. You know what to do? He won't be expecting it. Emily's chest tightened. James, please. You have to listen to me. His hand froze, and for the first time, he stopped laughing. The smile faded from his face as he looked at Emily, his mind racing. The truth was finally hitting him, hard and fast. This doesn't make sense. The world around them seemed to blur as the gravity of what she was saying sunk in. Could he trust her? Could he ignore the unease crawling up his spine? The roar of the engine revving again snapped him back to reality. He turned, glancing toward the car, where the man now stood, his eyes locked on James. Something wasn't right. Something felt off. His heart pounded in his chest as Emily stepped closer, her eyes locked onto his. He's coming for you, she said, her voice barely a whisper. James looked at her, his face pale. Could she really be telling the truth? The night had just taken a turn he wasn't prepared for. Would he make it out unscathed, or would he fall into a trap he never saw coming? James stood frozen for a moment, the phone still in his hand, the video playing over and over in his mind. The man outside the car was still there, his eyes never leaving James, his presence like a shadow, ominous and silent. Emily's voice echoed in his ears. He's coming for you. And he felt the weight of her words sink deeper. His fingers tightened around the phone, and for the first time, he felt fear creeping up his spine. This isn't happening, he muttered, trying to convince himself. He turned back to Emily, searching her face for reassurance, but her eyes only reflected the same worry that had been building inside him since she first screamed. What do we do now? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily's face was calm, but her hands shook slightly as she reached into her pocket and pulled out something small. A piece of paper. It was wrinkled, torn at the edges, but it held significance. She handed it to him without a word. James unfolded it slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. The paper was a note, with a few words scrawled hastily. He's not who he says he is. Don't trust him. It was signed with a name James didn't recognize. His mind raced. Who wrote this? Why had Emily kept it hidden? The car engine roared again, breaking the silence. The man was moving, walking toward them now, his steps slow but deliberate. James felt his pulse quicken. We need to get out of here, Emily said, her voice steady but urgent. James looked at her, then at the man, and back again. He wasn't sure what was real anymore. Was Emily's warning just paranoia? Or was there really something darker at play? The man stopped just a few feet away, his eyes locking with James's, and for a moment, it felt like time itself had stopped. Emily stepped in front of James, her small frame somehow making her seem larger, more powerful. Don't trust him, she whispered, almost to herself. James took a deep breath. He couldn't ignore this feeling anymore. Whatever was happening, it was real. Okay, he said finally, his voice firm. We leave. Now. He turned to walk away, but the man stepped forward, blocking their path. Leaving so soon? He asked, his voice smooth and calm. But James could hear the threat in his words. Emily stood her ground, not backing down. I said, don't trust him, she repeated, her eyes never leaving the man. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. James's heart was hammering in his chest, and he could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on him. The man just smiled, an unsettling, cold smile. You're making a mistake, he said quietly, his gaze flicking from Emily to James. The smile didn't reach his eyes. Emily's grip on James's arm tightened. I'm not wrong, she whispered. James looked at her, his mind racing. What do you mean? He asked, still trying to process everything. Emily didn't answer. Instead, she pulled out her phone again, quickly typing something, then showing it to him. The screen flashed with a new video, and this time, James's breath caught in his throat. The man was in it, but this time, there was no mistaking the danger. This wasn't just a warning. It was a threat. It's all real, Emily said softly, her voice filled with a quiet conviction. James's hands trembled as he watched the video, and the weight of the truth hit him like a ton of bricks. The man was more dangerous than he ever imagined. We need to go, he said, his voice shaking. Emily nodded, her eyes still locked on the man, who hadn't moved. The tension hung in the air like a storm waiting to break, and James knew, without a doubt, that the real danger was just beginning. James stumbled back, his mind reeling as the weight of Emily's words hit him like a freight train. The man was blocking their way, standing tall and unblinking, his eyes cold and calculating. Emily didn't flinch. She stood in front of James, her small frame almost protective, like she knew something he didn't. The man's smile twisted, cruel but calm. You really think you can stop this? He asked, his voice smooth, almost mocking. James's pulse raced. Who are you? He demanded, his voice shaky but firm. The man didn't answer immediately. He just stared, a long, unsettling silence hanging between them. Then, in a voice low and dangerous, he said, You don't need to know. You'll be gone soon anyway. James's stomach dropped, the words chilling him to the core. Emily's grip on his arm tightened. She wasn't scared, not like he was. She had known all along. The man glanced at her, his eyes narrowing, as if something about her was suddenly making him reconsider. You think she's right, don't you? He sneered at James. She's just a child. What could she possibly know? Emily didn't blink. I know what I saw, she said quietly. And I know what's coming. The man laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was the kind of laugh that sent a chill down your spine, the kind that felt like it was meant to mock you, to make you question everything you thought you knew. You're wasting your time, little girl, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. There's nothing you can do to stop this. James turned to Emily, his mind racing. What is he talking about? What's happening? Emily took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving the man. He's not who he says he is. He's dangerous, James. He's been watching you, and now he's ready to make his move. James felt his throat tighten. He wanted to believe Emily, to trust her, but everything was happening so fast, and he wasn't sure he was ready to face the truth. This isn't real, he whispered to himself, more to reassure himself than anything else. But the man's presence, his icy stare, and the way Emily was standing there, calm and resolute, told him otherwise. Emily's voice broke through his thoughts. It's happening now. You need to listen to me. The man stepped forward, his movements deliberate, but there was something in his eyes that James couldn't quite place. A flicker of hesitation, maybe? Or was it just his imagination? You think you can save him? The man sneered. You're too late. James felt the world tilt beneath him. Everything he thought he knew was unraveling. Was Emily right? Was this all just a twisted game? His heart was pounding, the anxiety bubbling up in his chest. What do you want from me? James asked, his voice rising in desperation. The man finally spoke, his words slow, deliberate, like a predator toying with its prey. I want you to understand, he said. Understand that there's nothing you can do to stop what's already in motion. Emily stepped closer to James, her voice steady but urgent. You need to go? Now. Her words were clear, like a command. James hesitated for a moment longer, then turned and started walking away, but the man's voice followed him. It's not over, James. You've already made your choice. The words hung in the air like a shadow, following him, reminding him that whatever this was, it wasn't over. Emily kept pace beside him, her eyes fixed ahead. James didn't speak. He couldn't. His mind was too full of questions, too full of fear. But one thing was certain now. He had no idea what he had just walked into, and he had no idea how to get out. As they reached the car, Emily's voice broke the silence. "It's not over yet," she said quietly. "But you'll be ready when it is." James looked at her, his heart still racing. Ready for what? Emily didn't answer. She just got in the car and buckled up. James followed, his mind still spinning. As the car pulled away from the driveway, the man watched them go, a cold smile on his face. He knew it wasn't over either. The car sped through the night, the city lights blurring as James's thoughts raced, each one faster than the last. Emily sat beside him, her eyes focused, her body tense. James couldn't bring himself to speak. The words he had heard earlier were still echoing in his head. "You've already made your choice." The man's voice, cold and unrelenting. What did that mean? What choice had he made? The weight of the night's events settled heavily on his chest, and the silence between him and Emily grew thicker. "Emily, I don't understand," James finally said, his voice low. "What did that man mean? What choice are we talking about?" Emily's gaze didn't waver from the road. "It's about what you're willing to risk," she said, her voice calm. But there was an edge to it, as if she had known this moment would come. "You've been living in your bubble, James, thinking you can control everything, but you can't. The truth is out there, and now it's catching up with you." James turned to her, his heart racing. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted, his voice thick with fear. "I don't know what's happening, and I feel like I'm losing control." Emily's eyes flicked to him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Control is an illusion," she said softly. "We all think we have it, but we don't. The man knows something, and now you have to figure out what it is before it's too late." Her words hit James like a wave crashing against a cliff, the force of them shaking him to his core. He had always prided himself on being in control, on knowing the answers, on making things happen. But now, he felt like he was drowning in uncertainty, and he didn't know how to escape it. The streets outside the car seemed to stretch endlessly, but no matter how fast they drove, James couldn't outrun the growing sense of dread that gripped him. "How do we stop this?" he asked, his voice desperate. Emily's gaze remained fixed ahead. "We don't stop it. We face it." James felt a shiver run down his spine at the finality in her tone. "Face it," he repeated, unsure what she meant. "The truth, James. The truth of what's been happening behind the scenes. You've seen the signs, you've heard the warnings. Now it's time to confront it." The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of what they meant. James's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. He wanted to believe Emily, to trust that facing the truth would somehow make it all make sense, but the fear in his chest was hard to ignore. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily turned to him then, her expression softening. "You don't have to be ready. You just have to be willing." Her words struck him harder than he expected. Willing? Was he willing to face whatever was coming? Was he willing to lose everything to uncover the truth? The car slowed as they approached a familiar building, and Emily's hand rested lightly on his arm. "We're here," she said, her voice steady. James glanced at the building ahead, his heart pounding. Was he ready for what awaited him inside? The man, the warning, the truth, it was all converging, and he was about to walk into the storm. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I guess there's no turning back now," he muttered, more to himself than to Emily. She didn't answer, but her gaze told him everything he needed to know. It was time to face what he had been avoiding all along. The door clicked shut behind them, and James felt the weight of the silence pressing on him. Emily had led the way, stepping confidently into the room, while James lingered behind, his mind still spinning. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with tension, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Emily turned to him, her expression unreadable, but her eyes held a quiet intensity that James couldn't ignore. "This is it," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You're about to learn the truth." James swallowed hard, trying to steady the racing in his chest. The man's warning still echoed in his mind, and he couldn't shake the feeling that every step he took was leading him closer to a trap. "Are you sure we should be here?" he asked, his voice tight. Emily didn't answer at first. She just walked over to a table in the corner of the room, where a stack of papers lay neatly arranged. She picked one up and handed it to him without a word. James took the paper from her, his hands trembling. The document was official-looking, the type of paper that meant business, serious business. He scanned the contents, his eyes widening as he realized what it said. It was a contract, a binding agreement, and the name on the top made his stomach turn. His own. How? He whispered, unable to fully comprehend what he was reading. Emily's gaze never wavered. That's how it all started, she said quietly. That's what you agreed to. James felt his throat tighten as he looked at the paper again. The contract, signed with his name, was full of terms he had never agreed to, terms that didn't make sense. His mind raced, trying to piece it all together. I didn't sign this, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't even know about it. Emily nodded slowly, her expression still calm, but with an edge of sadness. You didn't, but someone made sure you would. James's head spun as the realization hit him. Someone had manipulated him, had used his name without his consent. But who? And why? Emily stepped forward, her eyes softening for the first time since they had entered the room. I know this is a lot to take in, she said, her voice gentle now. But this is only the beginning. There's more you need to see. James shook his head, trying to push the overwhelming flood of emotions back. I don't understand. How could this happen? Why would anyone do this? Emily placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch warm, reassuring. Because they knew you'd never see it coming, she said softly. They've been watching you for a long time, James. And now they're moving closer. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Who was watching him? Who had orchestrated all of this? Emily's eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw something other than resolve. He saw empathy, as though she understood exactly how he felt. You don't have to face this alone, she said. We'll figure it out together. But first, we need to find out who is behind all of this. James nodded slowly, the weight of the situation still pressing on him. He didn't know what the next step would be, but one thing was clear, his life was no longer his own. It had been taken from him, piece by piece, and now, he had to take it back. The truth was out there, and he had to find it before it was too late. Emily turned and walked toward the door. Let's go, she said. The next part of the journey starts now. James followed her, his heart pounding. He didn't know what awaited him, but he knew. One thing for certain, this was only the beginning. James's mind was spinning as they walked out of the room, the weight of the contract still pressing heavily on his chest. He didn't know how to process what he had just learned, or why Emily seemed so calm about it all. His life had just been turned upside down, and yet, she walked with purpose, as though she had expected this moment to come. They stepped into the car, the door slamming shut behind them. James gripped the seat, trying to steady himself, but the sense of uncertainty was overwhelming. Emily turned to him, her eyes sharp, focused. This isn't over yet, she said, her voice steady. We need to figure out who's behind all of this, and we need to do it fast. James nodded, still trying to absorb everything. How do we even start? We don't know who we're up against. Emily's expression softened, just for a moment. We do now, she said. It's all in the details, James. The contract, the people you've worked with, the deals you've made. Someone is pulling the strings, and we need to follow the trail. James felt a shiver run down his spine. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about something bigger, something more dangerous. So what's the plan? He asked, his voice still shaky. We find out who's behind this, Emily replied, her tone firm. We get close, and we take them down. James felt his chest tighten. Was he really ready for this? Was he ready to confront the person who had been controlling his life, using his name, making decisions for him? The road stretched out in front of them, the city lights flickering as they passed. It felt like they were driving into the unknown, and with every mile, the fear inside him grew. What if we're too late? He asked, his voice low. What if they've already got what they want? Emily's eyes never left the road ahead. Then we stop them before they do, she said, her voice cold with determination. We don't give them the chance to finish what they started. James didn't say anything. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know if he could do what Emily was asking of him, if he could go up against someone with this much power. But one thing was certain, he couldn't keep running from it. The truth was already out there, and it was time to face it. The car turned a corner, and they pulled into a quiet street, the city's noise fading away behind them. Emily stopped the car, her eyes scanning the surroundings. "This is it," she said, her voice calm but laced with urgency. "We're close." James looked out the window, his heart pounding in his chest. Was he ready to take this final step? Was he ready to face the person who had been pulling the strings all along? Emily turned to him, her expression serious. "It's now or never, James." He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing thoughts. "Let's do it," he said, his voice steady for the first time that night. They got out of the car, and as they walked toward the building, James felt the weight of everything he had learned pressing on him. There was no turning back now. He was in it. And whatever happened next, he had to face it head on. James stood in front of the building, the weight of the night pressing down on him. His hands were clammy, his heart racing, but Emily moved with purpose, walking toward the door without a second thought. James hesitated for a moment, his eyes scanning the street behind them. It was silent now, too quiet, as if the city had fallen into a temporary lull, waiting for something to happen. "We're here," Emily said without looking back. James nodded, though his mind was still racing. They were close now, closer than he had ever been to the truth, and he didn't know if he was ready for what came next. He had spent his life running, controlling everything around him, but now, with every step, he felt like he was losing that control. They reached the door, and Emily pushed it open, stepping into the dimly lit hallway. James followed, his footsteps echoing through the empty space. The building was old, the walls cracked, and the air smelled faintly of dust and something else, something that James couldn't quite place. "It's just ahead," Emily said, her voice steady. She didn't seem nervous, but James could feel the tension in the air, thick with anticipation. "What if they're waiting for us?" James asked, his voice tight. "Then we'll be ready." Emily replied simply, not breaking her stride. They reached the end of the hall, and Emily stopped in front of a door. She turned to James, her eyes meeting his. "This is it," she said softly. James nodded, taking a deep breath. His chest tightened, and for a moment, he wasn't sure if he could go through with it. But he had come this far. He had to see it through. Emily turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room beyond was dark, the only light coming from a small desk lamp in the corner. James stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the low light. The room was simple, almost too simple, and yet, it felt like it held 1,000 secrets. He glanced around, but it was the man sitting at the desk that drew his attention. He was tall, his back straight, and his eyes dark, almost unreadable. "I was wondering when you'd show up," the man said, his voice low and smooth. Emily stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "We're here to finish this," she said. James stayed behind, his mind racing. Was this the person who had been pulling the strings all along? Was this the one who had been using his name, manipulating his every move? The man's lips curled into a faint smile. "Finish it," he repeated, his voice almost amused. "You don't even know what you're dealing with." James felt a chill run down his spine. The man was calm, too calm, as if he knew exactly how this would play out. Emily stood her ground, not backing down. "We know enough," she said, "and it's time to put an end to it." The man's smile faded, replaced by something colder, something darker. "You think you've got all the pieces?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. "You think you can stop this?" Emily's eyes narrowed. "Yes," she said firmly. "We can." James felt the air grow heavy, the tension thickening around them. He didn't know what was going to happen next, but he could feel it. The moment of truth was here, and there was no turning back. The man stood up slowly, his expression unreadable. "Then let's see what you're really made of," he said, his voice cold as ice. The room seemed to close in around them, and for the first time, James felt like he was truly out of control. But he had no choice now. He had come too far. The truth was finally within reach, and he wasn't going to back down. The man stood across from them, his cold gaze fixed on James and Emily, the silence between them thick and heavy. James could feel the pressure mounting, the weight of everything that had led him to this moment pressing down on him. He had always been in control, always managed to navigate his way out of tight spots, but now, in this moment, he had no idea what to expect. The man's lips curved into a slight smile, but it was a smile that made James uneasy. "You think you've uncovered the truth?" the man asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "You have no idea what's really going on, do you?" Emily stood tall, her posture unwavering. "I know enough," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the tension. And that's all we need to end this. The man chuckled softly, but there was no humor in it. You think you can just walk in here and take control of everything? You don't understand the forces at play. James felt his heartbeat quicken, but he held his ground. I don't care about the forces, he said, his voice stronger now. I care about the truth, and I'm going to make sure it's exposed. The man's expression darkened slightly. He stepped forward, his eyes never leaving James. You're playing a dangerous game, he said, his tone low, and you're going to regret it. Emily's eyes flicked to James for a moment, her gaze steady and reassuring. We've already come too far to back down now, she said, her voice filled with quiet conviction. The man's lips parted slightly, his eyes narrowing as if considering his next move. You're both fools if you think you can stop what's already in motion, he said, his voice colder now, more menacing. James swallowed, his hands clenched at his sides, but he refused to let the man see the fear that was creeping in. He had to focus, had to stay strong. We'll stop it, he said, his voice steady. We'll stop you. The man's smile faded, replaced by a look of pure disdain. You have no idea what you're up against, he said, shaking his head slowly. You don't understand the stakes. You never did. Emily stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. Maybe we don't understand everything, she said. But we understand enough to know that this has to end. Now, for a moment, the room was completely still. The air was thick with tension, and James could feel the weight of every word hanging between them. The man's eyes flickered briefly, a hint of something, maybe doubt, maybe frustration, passing through them before he masked it with a sneer. Fine, he said, his voice cold and final. You want to see how deep this goes? I'll show you. James's heart raced as the man turned and walked toward a desk in the corner of the room. He reached for something, and for a moment, James thought it was a weapon. But then the man turned back, holding a thick folder, the kind used for important documents. This is just the beginning, the man said, his voice laced with warning. You have no idea what you've unleashed. He handed the folder to Emily, his gaze still fixed on James. Take a look, he said. See for yourselves what you've gotten involved in. Emily opened the folder, her eyes scanning the papers inside. She didn't react at first, but James could see the way her body stiffened as she read. This, she whispered, her voice barely audible. James moved closer, trying to see what was written, but he couldn't make sense of the words on the page. He glanced at the man, his mind racing. What is this? He asked, his voice strained. The man's smile returned, but it was colder this time. The truth, he said simply. The truth you've been searching for. And now, you're in it. James felt a wave of realization wash over him, but it was quickly replaced by a surge of anger. He had been so close, so sure that he was about to take back control, and now this? The truth was more complicated than he could have ever imagined. But he wasn't going to let it defeat him. We'll find a way to stop this, he said, his voice unwavering. We'll expose everything. The man's expression was unreadable as he stared at James, but for a brief moment, there was something in his eyes, something almost like respect. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. We'll see, he said softly, before turning and walking away. The room felt colder now, the air thick with tension. James's hands were still shaking as he stared at the folder in Emily's hands, the weight of the truth settling heavily on him. The man's words echoed in his mind. This is just the beginning. But what did that mean? What had he gotten himself into? Emily closed the folder slowly, her face unreadable. This is bigger than we thought, she said, her voice soft but firm. James didn't respond at first. He couldn't. His mind was still racing, trying to process everything he had just seen. There was something about this whole situation that didn't sit right, something more than just the contract and the mystery behind it. How could they have gotten to me? James finally asked, his voice low. How could they control everything without me knowing? Emily met his gaze, her eyes steady. They didn't just control you, she said, her voice steady and calm. They controlled everything around you. Every decision, every move, every deal. You've been a pawn in their game. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. A pawn. He had always believed he was in control, always thought he was the one calling the shots. But now, he was just a piece in someone else's game. A game he didn't even know he was playing. So what now? James asked, his voice thick with frustration. How do we stop them? Emily's gaze never wavered. We take control back, she said simply. We expose them. We tear everything down. James felt a surge of anger rise in him. I'm not going to just sit back and let them win, he said, his voice rising. We'll figure this out. We'll take them down. Emily nodded, her eyes filled with resolve. That's the only way, she said. But it's not going to be easy. They're watching, James. They know everything about you. They've been pulling the strings for years. The weight of her words hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. James's mind raced. He had no idea how they could take on such an immense force, but one thing was clear. He couldn't stop now. He couldn't back down. The stakes were too high, and the truth was more dangerous than he had ever imagined. So, what's our first move? He asked. His voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts in his head, mind racing as he tried to think of the next step. But nothing seemed clear. Everything was a puzzle, each piece not quite fitting together. Emily stopped in front of a door, her hand resting lightly on the handle. She glanced back at him, her face unreadable. This is it, she said softly. James's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure if he was ready to face whatever lay behind that door, but he knew it was the only way forward. He nodded, and Emily pushed the door open. The room was dark, the only light coming from a desk lamp in the corner. The shadows seemed to stretch across the walls, giving the space a sense of emptiness. James's eyes scanned the room, trying to take in every detail. There was something unsettling about the quiet, about the way everything felt frozen in time. What is this place? He asked, his voice low. Emily stepped inside, her gaze fixed on a small filing cabinet against the far wall. This is where the answers are, she said, her tone unwavering. We just need to find them. James followed her across the room, his steps slow but purposeful. The silence was deafening, each footstep echoing in the stillness. Emily knelt in front of the filing cabinet and began to pull out drawers, one by one, her hands moving with practiced precision. James stood by, watching, waiting, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. There was a tension in the air, something he couldn't quite place. He glanced around the room, his senses on high alert. Do you hear that? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily paused, her head tilting slightly as she listened. There was a soft sound coming from somewhere in the building, a faint creaking noise that seemed to come from the far end of the hall. It's probably just the building settling, Emily said, her voice calm. But James wasn't so sure. His heart was pounding in his chest, and he couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching them. We need to hurry, he said, his voice urgent. Emily nodded, pulling out another drawer. We will, she said. We're getting closer. James glanced over at her, watching as she flipped through the papers inside the drawer. His mind raced with the possibility of what they might find. Were they really close to the truth? Or were they walking into a trap? Here, Emily said suddenly, her voice sharp. She pulled out a stack of papers, each one filled with details, names, dates, contracts. James took a deep breath as he reached for them, his hands shaking as he flipped through the pages. The more he saw, the more the pieces began to fall into place. This is it, he whispered. This is how they've been controlling everything. Emily nodded, her expression unreadable. Now we can take them down, she said softly. But as James looked at the papers in his hands, a sinking feeling hit him. This was just the beginning. There were still so many unanswered questions, so many risks. But they had come this far, and they couldn't stop now. The truth was right in front of them, and they weren't going to let it slip away. Not now. Not after everything they had been through. James felt the weight of the papers in his hands as he sifted through the stack. Every name, every date seemed to carry a heavier burden than the last. He couldn't quite make sense of everything at once, but one thing was certain. The people behind all this were more powerful than he had imagined. Emily stood beside him, watching, waiting for him to connect the dots. Do you understand it now? She asked, her voice steady but with a quiet intensity that mirrored the urgency in the air. James took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing thoughts. I think so, he said, his voice hoarse. This is all connected. All the deals, all the names. They've been manipulating everything. Emily nodded, her eyes never leaving him. That's right. And now you see what's at stake. These people won't stop until they have complete control. The weight of her words hit him like a ton of bricks. He had thought he was in control, but it was clear now. He was just a player in someone else's game. But we can stop them, right? James asked, looking up from the papers. His hands were trembling. But he wasn't going to let fear control him now. Emily's gaze softened, but her determination never wavered. Yes, she said, her voice firm. We can. But it won't be easy. We have to be smarter than they are. James nodded, feeling the adrenaline kick in. He was done being the pawn in someone else's game. He had to fight back, no matter the cost. So what's the plan? He asked, his voice steady. Emily glanced at the papers in his hands, then at the door. We need to get this information to the right people, she said. We can't take them down on our own. But we can expose them, make sure the truth comes to light. James swallowed hard. The truth, he realized, wasn't just about exposing the people behind this conspiracy. It was about uncovering everything they had hidden, every lie they had woven. And what if they come after us first? James asked, the fear creeping back into his voice. Emily turned to him, her expression unflinching. Then we'll be ready, she said simply. The certainty in her voice reassured him, but only just. We need to move quickly, Emily added, glancing at the door again. The longer we stay here, the more danger we're in. James nodded, pushing the fear down deep inside. They had come this far. There was no turning back now. Let's do it, he said, his voice steady and resolute. Emily gave him a brief smile, one that spoke volumes. They weren't just uncovering the truth anymore. They were going to make sure it mattered. They were going to make sure the people behind this conspiracy paid for what they had done. They had a chance now, but only if they moved fast. And so, with one last look at the papers in his hands, James followed Emily to the door, ready to face whatever came next. As they stepped out into the night, James knew one thing for certain. The real battle was just beginning. James and Emily walked swiftly through the quiet streets, their footsteps echoing in the stillness of the night. The world around them seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The papers in James's hand felt heavier with every step, and the weight of their mission pressed on him. Like 1,000 pounds. He knew they were getting closer to the truth, but with each step, the danger seemed to grow more real. We need to get this to the right people, Emily said, her voice breaking. Through his thoughts, James nodded, his mind racing. I know, but who can we trust? He asked, his voice tense. Emily glanced at him, her face hardening. We can't trust anyone who's been involved in this from the start, she said. But we don't have a choice. We have to make it count. James swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. They had no choice but to act. They couldn't keep running. Not anymore. So where do we go? He asked, his voice low. Emily looked ahead, her eyes sharp, scanning the street as they walked. There's a safe house, she said after a beat. It's secure. We'll be able to contact the people who can help us from there. James's heart raced as he tried to think of all the things that could go wrong. He had always been in control, always had the answers. But now, he was following Emily, relying on her judgment. It was a strange feeling, and one he wasn't sure he liked. And what happens when we get there? He asked, his voice tight. Emily didn't answer immediately, and for a moment, James thought she hadn't heard him. But then she spoke, her voice steady but filled with a quiet determination. We expose everything, she said. We let the world know what's really going on. The people who've been pulling the strings won't be able to hide anymore. James felt a surge of anger, but it was mixed with something else, hope. Could it really be that simple? Could they actually take down the people who had been controlling his life for so long? We'll make sure they pay for what they've done, Emily added, her voice hardening. James nodded, though doubt still lingered in his mind. We will, he said, his voice steady now. But we have to move fast. The longer we wait, the more they'll cover up. Emily didn't respond. She just kept walking, her pace quickening. James matched her stride, his mind racing with possibilities. He didn't know what would happen when they reached the safe house, but he knew one thing for sure. The truth was coming out, whether they were ready for it or not. As they approached the safe house, the tension between them was palpable. James could feel the weight of everything hanging over them. This was their last chance, the moment they had been working toward. But it was also their most dangerous move yet. They reached the door, and Emily knocked 3 times, a quick, sharp sound that seemed to echo through the still night. There was a pause, and then the door opened, revealing a man standing in the doorway. His face was familiar, but James couldn't place him. You're late, the man said, his voice low but not unfriendly. Emily nodded, stepping inside. We had some things to take care of, she said. James followed her, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what to expect next, but he knew they had come too far to turn back now. The door closed behind them, sealing them in with whatever awaited them inside. The real battle was about to begin. Inside the safe house, the door closed behind them with a soft thud, and the room seemed to close in on James. The dim light cast long shadows on the walls, and the quiet hum of the air conditioner was the only sound in the room. Emily moved toward a desk in the corner, where a laptop sat open. She didn't look at James as she sat down, her fingers quickly moving over the keyboard. James stood frozen for a moment, his mind still reeling from the events that had led him here. The papers, the truth, the names, all of it felt like too much to process at once. He had trusted the wrong people, believed in the wrong things, and now, it was all coming to a head. Emily glanced up at him, her eyes sharp and focused. "We need to move fast," she said, her voice low but steady. James nodded, though he wasn't sure if he was ready for what came next. He had always been the one in control, the one who made the decisions, but now, it felt like he was just a spectator in his own life. "How do we even know who to trust?" James asked, his voice tight. Emily didn't hesitate. "We trust the truth," she said firmly. "The people behind this have been manipulating you, controlling everything you thought you knew. But now, we're going to make sure they can't hide anymore." James's heart raced at the finality in her voice. He had spent so long running from the truth, but now, Emily was making it clear that there was no running anymore. "So, what's our next move?" he asked, his voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling in his mind. Emily tapped a few more keys on the laptop before turning it toward James. "We send this information to the right people," she said, her eyes locking with his. "We let the world know what's really been happening, who's been pulling the strings, and we make sure they can't silence us." James looked at the screen, his eyes scanning the files. The names, the contracts, everything was laid bare before him. The truth was right there, staring him in the face. It was real. It was happening. And there was no turning back. "Are you sure about this?" James asked, his voice soft. Emily didn't answer right away. She just sat back in her chair, her expression unreadable as she thought for a moment. Then she nodded. "We've come this far," she said quietly. "There's no backing down now." James took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of thoughts in his head. This was the moment they had been working toward, the moment when everything would change. But the fear, the uncertainty, still lingered. Could they really take down the people behind this? Could they expose the truth and walk away unscathed? "Okay," James said finally, his voice firm. "Let's do it." Emily nodded, and without another word, she pressed a key, sending the information to the people they had contacted. The data would reach the right hands, and the truth would be out there. It felt like a weight had been lifted off his chest, but the storm wasn't over yet. They had made their move, but now, they had to face the consequences. "We did it," James said, his voice almost a whisper. "But now what?" Emily stood, closing the laptop and turning to face him. "Now we wait," she said, "and we prepare for whatever comes next." James nodded, though the uncertainty still gnawed at him. The truth was out there, but so were the people who didn't want it to see the light of day. And no matter what, they weren't going to stop until they had taken control back. Whatever happened next, they had already made the choice to fight back. And there was no going back now.